Look at this one. Oh my goodness, I can't wait to share all the ins and outs of this quilt on this episode of Lessons from an Old Quilt. It's so great. But first, my name is Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. Thank you for joining me. I can't wait to dive into this. This quilt was purchased in 2022 while I was on vacation in Florida. I paid $60 for this quilt. I purchased it at one of those thrift shops that are in churches, you know, so I felt really good about even just supporting a thrift shop like that. And with Easter coming up, I thought it was an awesome quilt to share with all of you too, because to me it looks very Easter-like, almost like a cross in the middle of this Dresden plate. Speaking of which, this is a Dresden plate block design. It's called Fancy Dresden Plate because, well, it's fancy. And this particular quilt measures 75 by 100 inches, so it's nice and big. The blocks themselves are 16 by 16, and there are 24 of these magnificent blocks in this quilt. It is completely done by hand, 100%, all of it done by hand, and it's incredible. There's so many cool, unique features in this quilt and so much that we can learn from it. I do believe this is dated around the 1960s. Could be earlier, could be later, it's tough to tell. There was a tag on it when I bought it that said it was made in 1962, so that's a good clue, but I don't know who put that on there, whether it was the owner or somebody in the shop or whatever. Either way, the fabrics in this do support that. Who knows? I'm not quite sure. So let's take a closer look at this beauty. So the block is here, and it's 16 by 16, so you can see the seams are on the outside here, and the applique, or the Dresden plate, Fancy Dresden plate, is appliqued onto a full piece of fabric. Again, 16 by 16. Dresden plates, I think all the time, have 20 blades, and usually we see the blades be all the same, as in curved or pointed, but with the Fancy Dresden plate, it is a combination of pointed and of curved blades. So pretty, I love it. Also, we see the circle that is appliqued in the middle, and then these orange peel pieces that are actually appliqued onto a circle background and then placed onto this. So there's many layers to this. Because this purple is the same as these pointy blades, however, it almost looks like all of the purple is one piece and then placed on top, but it's not. These blades are sewn together and then the circle is put on. And if we look at the fabrics, we can see in this particular one, there are only 2 other fabrics, and the maker alternated those fabrics. I think there are 14 blocks like that where there are 2 fabrics, but then there are some blocks that have more than 2 fabrics. So if we slide it over here, you can see that this one has 3 different fabrics. Yes, 3 different fabrics, and they alternate. There's some pattern to it, but not necessarily a consistent pattern per se. Is there for this one? Actually, there is for this one, but let me find one that's not exactly consistent. Here's a good example. This is actually one of my favorites. So you can see here that this pink fabric isn't always in the same spot, but it's the same fabrics used, with the exception of this one, which makes me wonder maybe the maker ran out of a certain fabric and put this in. So interesting. There's another one like this. Let's look at that one. Right here, which has that same gingham, which I love too, highlights it really well. And it isn't exactly in the same order, but it is the same fabrics used. So there's consistency within each block, but between blocks, there's differences. I hope that makes sense. I love that. It's a controlled scrappy that is just really unique in that way. At first I thought maybe different people made these blocks, but on inspection of these, they do seem to be all consistently sewn together, including the applique stitches. They're all about the same, so I think they were made by the same person. One other thing I wanted to talk about with the fabric, let me find one of the blocks, here we go. This one, oh my goodness. Now this isn't present in all of the blocks, but some of them have fussy cutting, or focus cutting as some people call it, motifs of these girls in these fans. I love it. It's almost, I don't know, it's a hidden surprise that's in this quilt. That's just great. All right, so let's talk about the quilting. The quilting's incredible. The maker quilted around all of the blades and then the perimeter of the blades. Also did some dense quilting here in the middle, and has a quilted motif between the blocks where the corners come together, and then a rope between those. On the edges, we see that half motif here. But on the borders, we see a vine motif, and it's not as heavily quilted. It almost looks like it was an afterthought or added separately, although it wasn't. When you look at the back, it wasn't. It just, I don't know, it gives that feel, especially with the fabrics being a little bit different. And while we're over here, we'll just talk quickly about the binding. The binding is a separate piece that was put on by hand, completely by hand, and the fabric matches that cross pattern in the Fancy Dresden block. The condition of this quilt is fair. There are a lot of stains. I have not tried washing it yet. I do want to, but I'll show you why I haven't tried washing it here in a minute. There are a few little holes in it, nothing major. It's something you would expect for something this age. All right, I'm gonna turn it over and show you the back. Okay, the back is all one piece as far as I can tell. I don't see any piecing in it. You can see how beautifully it's quilted. Oh, I just love it. But one unique thing, let me see a block that you can really see it here. The maker never buried any of the threads, the quilting threads. So they're just kind of hanging out here. Some of them are tangled. It's weird to me because I'm surprised that these quilting threads didn't come undone and the quilting didn't come out. It's also the reason I haven't washed it yet, because if I do wash it, I want to make sure I bury all of these threads so they don't come undone, and it extends the life of this incredible quilt. But you can see all the beautiful quilting. I love it. The batting is cotton, and you can see when I put it up to the light how it comes through. You can see the clumping in between those quilted areas. I think that's so cool. It looks like stained glass, and I love it. Such a great quilt. So cool, so pretty. Lessons. Oh, so many lessons we can learn from this one. I cover 3 here. I have 2 more on my blog, but there are so many, and I'd love to hear from you on what you think the lessons that we can learn from this are. Does that make sense? Let me know what you think about this quilt, is basically what I'm saying. All right, so let's get started. The first one is that the binding matches the purple fabric in the applique. I love that cohesiveness. That purple binding just frames this quilt so well and gives a connection to that purple cross-like thing in the Fancy Dresden Plate block. And I think as makers, we can learn from that too. The next thing that we can learn is about the scrap cohesiveness. So this obviously is a scrappy quilt. There is a controlled element with that purple fabric, so it's a controlled scrappy, but it's even more controlled in a way because each block has scraps in it, but they're controlled, meaning that they are in specific orders. They're not completely all scrappy, as in every blade is different. They are controlled. And we see that time and time again with each of these blocks. And speaking of which, another thing that's really cool about that is that the blocks aren't consistent with the amount of pieces that are in it. I love that there's a mix of Fancy Dresden plates that have 3, 4, 5 different fabrics with ones that have the 2 different fabrics. I think it's a wonderful testimony to the maker because it does give you that nice variety without being stuck to a specific rule. Another thing that we can learn is about that fussy cutting, or focus cutting as some people like to call it. I think this is so great, and it's not in every block. It's just kind of a little Easter egg, again with our Easter quilt, that gives it some whimsy. It's a nice touch that we see in this quilt and a nice little surprise. So as makers, we could do stuff like that in our own quilts, put little surprises in the blocks or the quilting or whatever it may be. Isn't it great? I love this quilt. Thank you so much for joining me for the exploration or the detective work on this incredible beauty. It just makes me want to make one. Also, my next quilt that I will be covering is the hexagon quilt that I know everybody is anxious to see. I can't wait to share that one with you too, because that's a super special quilt. Not that they all aren't special, but that one's really neat too. If you want more information about this quilt, you can check out my blog. I have more information on there, a little bit of the history of the block, that kind of stuff. Also, I'll put a playlist at the end here so you can check out my other episodes of Lessons from an Old Quilt. I think I'm at like 69 or 70 quilts that I've covered so far in the Lessons from an Old Quilt series, so make sure you check them out. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you take some time to sew, and I'll see you real soon. Bye.